Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the government will not be intimidated by any retaliation. This after China announced it's expelling a Canadian consular official in Shanghai in retaliation for Ottawa's expulsion of a Chinese consular official here. CSIS alleges Toronto-based diplomat Zhao Wei was involved in a plot to intimidate Conservative MP Michael Chong as well as his relatives in Hong Kong. So for more on this story, we're joined live this afternoon by former Conservative Cabinet Minister Peter MacKay. MacKay was the Minister of National Defence and Foreign Affairs in the Harper government. So great to have you here this afternoon. What is your reaction to this, now tit-for-tat response back and forth between Canada and China? Canada goes first, China retaliates.
Well, quite frankly, I'm not surprised at all. I think people anticipated that there would be this type of response. This has happened before, of course, as we saw with the two Michaels. And the Chinese like to retaliate first. In many ways, there's no denying that they provoked this with their activities involving potential foreign interference in both elections, federally and municipally. And what they were trying to do, of course, involving a democratically elected member of the House of Commons, the Honourable Michael Chong. It's really outrageous, but nothing we haven't seen in other regions as well, including in Australia.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the two Michaels, Peter, and that's interesting because I wonder if any Canadians in China right now should be potentially concerned because China sort of is escalating the rhetoric more, suggesting that, Canada will face some even potentially harsher consequences. Could that mean other Canadians potentially rounded up there?
Well, it's a good point, Nick, and I think the answer is yes, and that's why there is now warnings on the Global Affairs website for Canadians traveling in that region, like in other countries, where this escalated tension does potentially put other Canadians at risk. And I don't want to sound alarmist, but we have seen ample evidence of what can happen. And it's arbitrary. While it's very much directed at Canadian citizens, it's meant to intimidate. And it's meant very much to send a message that Canadians, high profile or otherwise, should not be talking about human rights abuses. They shouldn't be talking about what's happened to Uyghurs, Tibetans, anyone who disagrees with the Chinese communist regime.
So clearly there's a track record there on behalf of China. I wonder what you think this what kind of message Canadians, though, should understand about how the Liberal Justin Trudeau government and CSIS have handled this, because apparently CSIS at least has known about this for a couple of years now.
Well, they've known about it for a couple of years, and I think, Nick, to get right to the point, I think that's what this inquiry and repertoire, although unfortunately he may have been compromised by his association to the government. And yet that's what we really need to get to the bottom of, is who knew what and when, and why didn't they do something about it? I would say that the retaliation, if you will, is coming late to the game, and that the message I do agree with is that Canadians can't tolerate this type of interference and won't tolerate this type of interference. And it's why people like Michael Chong and previously Kenny Chu, the MP from Vancouver, who lost his seat potentially because of interference, were calling for a foreign registry, like they have in Australia and the US and the UK and other countries, that is shining a light and putting more transparency on who's trying to influence politics in Canada.
Right. So, of course, you're the former Foreign Affairs Minister. How difficult is it, sir, to stand up to China?
It is difficult because they play by a completely different set of rules. I remember making an intervention in Beijing on behalf of a Canadian citizen who was detained there, Hussein Jalil, who's still there years later. And they simply do not believe that there is a free press. They don't believe that people are democratically elected. And they are used to pulling the strings on every single file. And so, therefore, we talk not just a different language per se, but they don't believe in the power of the people. They do not believe that Canada has a functioning democracy. And that's why I believe to some degree, they are feeling with impunity that they can interfere. Now, they have other motives, of course, including taking intellectual property, getting access to resources, but they operate from a completely different set of rules, to state the obvious.
Okay. All right, Peter MacKay, always good to get your perspective on stories like this. Thanks for joining us this afternoon on CP24.
My pleasure, Nick. The best to you.
Take care as well, yes.